The sandwich slipped from Evelyn Green's fingers when she saw the order total $5,000 for a catering event tomorrow morning. Her small Brooklyn deli, the Daily Bread, had been struggling for months, and this order from a company called Falcon Industries might just save her from having to close her doors for good. "They need 100 specialty sandwiches by 9 a.m. tomorrow," Evelyn mumbled to herself as she scanned the email again. "Who spends this much on sandwiches?" Her assistant, Marco, peeked over her shoulder at the computer screen. "Holy crap, Evie, that's the biggest order we've ever had." "It's from some big shot at Falcon Industries, some Preston Falcon." Evelyn's eyes widened. Wait, the Preston Falcon, the shipping and logistics billionaire. Everyone in New York knew about Preston Falcon. At 34, he had revolutionized the global shipping industry with innovative routing algorithms and sustainable practices, amassing a fortune that landed him on every business magazine cover. But he was known for being intensely private, no social media presence, rare interviews, and barely any photographs in circulation. Evelyn quickly composed herself. "We're going to need to work all night to prep this. Call Danny and see if she can come in early tomorrow. We need all hands on deck." The all-night prep session was grueling but worth it. By 8 a.m., they had created 100 gourmet sandwiches, each one crafted with the care and attention to detail that had built Evelyn's reputation in the neighborhood. She wasn't just another deli owner. She was a culinary artist who had trained in Paris before returning to Brooklyn to open her own place. Her artisan breads and unique flavor combinations had earned her a loyal customer base, though not quite enough to make ends meet lately. At 8:30 a.m., Evelyn loaded the last sandwich box into her delivery van and headed toward the gleaming Falcon Tower in Manhattan. Her stomach twisted with nerves. This was the biggest order of her career, and she couldn't afford to mess it up. The security guard at Falcon Tower examined her delivery authorization before directing her to a service elevator. 52nd floor, Mr. Falcon's assistant will meet you." Evelyn's palms were sweaty as she navigated the elevator with her precious cargo. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a tall, elegant woman with a tablet in hand. "Miss Green, I'm Vivian, Mr. Falcon's executive assistant. Thank you for coming on such short notice." "It's no problem at all," Evelyn replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. As they walked through the office, Evelyn couldn't help but notice how different it was from the sterile corporate environments she'd expected. The space was filled with plants, natural light, and comfortable seating areas where employees were engaged in animated discussions. "Mr. Falcon believes in creating spaces that foster creativity and well-being," Vivian explained, noticing Evelyn's surprise. "We'll set up the sandwiches in the main conference room. There's an all-day strategy session today." Evelyn followed Vivian into a large conference room with a spectacular view of the city. She began arranging her sandwich platters artfully on the designated tables when the door opened. The man who walked in wasn't what she expected. Instead of an older executive in a power suit, Preston Falcon was surprisingly young, with tousled dark hair and intense blue eyes. He wore a simple navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and well-fitted dark jeans. No tie, no pretension, just an aura of quiet authority. "You must be the sandwich wizard," he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. "I've heard about your deli from several of my team members." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after working all night. "Mr. Falcon, it's an honor." "I'm Evelyn Green. Preston, please." He approached the table and examined her work. "These look incredible." Before she could respond, he picked up one of her signature creations, rosemary focaccia with slow roasted lamb, homemade mint aioli, and pickled red onions, and took a bite. His expression shifted from polite interest to genuine delight. "This is..." He paused, searching for the right words. "This is extraordinary. Where did you learn to make bread like this?" Evelyn relaxed slightly. "I studied at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, but the bread recipes are my grandmother's." She was from a small village in Italy. Preston nodded appreciatively. "It shows there's soul in this food." He turned to Vivian. We need to get the daily bread into our regular rotation for office lunches and events. Evelyn's heart leaped at the prospect of regular large orders. This could be the lifeline her business needed. I'd be happy to work with your team on a regular catering arrangement, she said, trying to maintain her professional composure while internally doing cartwheels of joy. Excellent. Preston smiled again, and Evelyn noticed the small dimple that appeared in his left cheek. But I'd like to discuss the details with you personally. Do you have time after you've finished setting up here? Of course, Evelyn replied, surprised by his personal interest in what would normally be delegated to an office manager. As Preston left to greet arriving executives, Vivian leaned in. He never takes meetings about catering. You've made quite an impression. An hour later, after ensuring everything was perfectly arranged and explaining each sandwich variety to the eager meeting attendees, Evelyn found herself in Preston's corner office. The space was surprisingly understated, with bookshelves lining one wall and a large desk, positioned to take advantage of the panoramic views of New York harbor the very waters that had built his shipping empire. Your sandwiches were a hit, Preston said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. Half of them disappeared before the meeting even started. I'm glad everyone enjoyed them, Evelyn replied, still somewhat nervous to be in the presence of someone whose net worth probably exceeded the GDP of small countries. I'll be direct, Miss Green, Preston said, leaning forward. I'd like to set up a standing order for various meetings and events. Probably 3 to 4 times a week. Would that work for your operation? Evelyn tried not to let her shock show. 3 to 4 large orders per week would transform her struggling business into a thriving enterprise. That would work perfectly, she managed. I can create rotating menus so your team doesn't get bored. Excellent, Preston nodded, but I have one condition. Here it comes, Evelyn thought, the catch. I'd like you to personally oversee the deliveries, at least initially, Preston continued. Quality control is important, and it's clear you're passionate about what you do. It was an unusual request from a billionaire CEO, but Evelyn wasn't about to refuse. I'd be happy to handle the deliveries myself, she agreed, wondering why he seemed so interested in her small deli when he surely had access to the city's most exclusive caterers. As she left Falcon Tower with a signed contract that guaranteed more money than her deli had made in the last 3 months combined, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had just happened, and it wasn't just the business opportunity. Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn personally delivered orders to Falcon Tower 3 times a week. Each time, Preston made a point of speaking with her, asking questions about specific ingredients or preparation methods. Their conversations gradually extended beyond food to books, travel, and their shared love of the city. On the 3rd week, as Evelyn was packing up after a particularly large lunch delivery, Preston appeared in the conference room doorway. You have a minute, he asked. Of course, Evelyn replied, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. I have a confession to make, Preston said, looking slightly uncomfortable. The first sandwich of yours I ever tried wasn't from today's order. One of my executives brought it back to the office after discovering your deli last month. I tried a bite and was immediately impressed. When I found out your business was struggling, wait, Evelyn interrupted, her cheeks flushing. How did you know my business was struggling? Preston had the grace to look embarrassed. I may have had my team do a little research before placing that first big order. I heard your deli was one of the best-kept secrets in Brooklyn, but that rising rents and competition from chains were making things difficult. Evelyn wasn't sure whether to be touched or offended. So this whole arrangement was what charity? No, Preston said firmly. It was recognition of excellence. Your food is exceptional, Evelyn. I've eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants all over the world, and your simple sandwich brought me more joy than most of those elaborate meals. I just wanted to make sure a talent like yours didn't disappear from New York. His sincerity was disarming, and Evelyn felt her indignation fade. Well, I appreciate the business, regardless of how it came about. Preston hesitated, then asked, would you consider having dinner with me? Not as a client, but just dinner. The question caught Evelyn off guard. She'd been so focused on the business opportunity that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge the growing attraction she felt toward him. "I don't usually date clients," she said cautiously. "I could stop ordering sandwiches," he offered with a mischievous smile. Evelyn laughed. "Please don't." "My staff would kill me." "Is that a yes to dinner then?" She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I'd like that." 2 nights later, Evelyn found herself not at some exclusive restaurant as she'd expected, but at a small, family-owned Italian place in the West Village. Preston was waiting outside when her taxi pulled up, dressed casually in a dark sweater and jeans. "I hope this is okay," he said as they entered the cozy restaurant. "It's one of my favorite places in the city. No one bothers me here." "It's perfect," Evelyn replied, relaxing as the warmth and aromas enveloped them. The owner greeted Preston like an old friend, leading them to a secluded corner table. Throughout dinner, Evelyn was struck by how normal Preston seemed passionate about his work, yes, but also funny, thoughtful, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone who controlled a global empire. "My father was a dock worker," Preston explained when she mentioned this. "He taught me the shipping business from the ground up. I never want to forget those roots." As the evening progressed, Evelyn found herself opening up about her own journey, her childhood dreams of becoming a chef, her grandmother's influence, the financial gamble of opening her own place after returning from Paris. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "Especially this past year. Before your order came in, I was seriously considering closing the deli." Preston reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm glad you didn't, not just because I would have missed out on those incredible sandwiches, but because I wouldn't have met you." The simple honesty in his words made Evelyn's heart race. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel the possibility of something beyond her struggling business, a connection that had nothing to do with bread or balance sheets. When Preston walked her home to her small apartment above the deli, their goodbye was a gentle kiss that left her wanting more. As she watched him disappear into his waiting car, Evelyn wondered if she was being foolish. What future could there possibly be between a billionaire shipping magnate and a deli owner from Brooklyn? Over the next month, Preston and Evelyn continued to see each other quiet dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants, walks along the High Line, even a sailing trip on his surprisingly modest boat in the harbor. Each encounter deepened their connection, but Evelyn maintained a guard around her heart, convinced their worlds were too different to truly merge. The facade cracked one rainy Sunday afternoon when Preston showed up at her apartment unannounced, soaking wet and carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I was in the neighborhood," he said with a grin that suggested he had made a special trip to Brooklyn just to see her. Evelyn invited him in, suddenly self-conscious about her small, cluttered space. But Preston seemed completely at ease, admiring her collection of cookbooks and the photos of her family that lined the walls. "Tell me about them," he said, pointing to a faded picture of an elderly couple standing in front of a rustic stone house. "That's my grandparents in Italy." "That's the house where my grandmother learned to bake," Evelyn explained, the memory bringing a smile to her face. "You miss it there," Preston observed. "Sometimes, the pace of life, the connection to food and family." Evelyn sighed. "It's very different from running a business in New York." Preston was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What would you do if money wasn't a concern? If you could take your passion for food in any direction?" The question caught her off guard. "I've never really allowed myself to think that way." "Try," Preston encouraged. Evelyn closed her eyes, allowing herself to dream. "I'd want to create a place that's more than just a deli, a community space where food brings people together. Cooking classes, special dinners, a place to preserve and share traditional recipes." She opened her eyes, embarrassed by her own enthusiasm. "It's silly." "It's not silly at all," Preston said, his expression serious. "It's beautiful." Something in his intensity made Evelyn uncomfortable. "Preston, why are you really here today?" He set down his coffee cup and took her hands in his. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Evelyn, and it terrifies me." The admission hung in the air between them. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. "It terrifies me too," she finally whispered. "Your world is so different from mine." "Is it?" Preston challenged gently. "We both built something from passion and hard work. We both value quality and integrity. We both care about creating something meaningful." He squeezed her hands. "The bank accounts might look different, but the foundations are the same." When he kissed her this time, Evelyn didn't hold back. She allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that they could bridge the gap between their worlds. The following week, Preston invited Evelyn to be his date for a major charity gala, their first public appearance together. The evening was a whirlwind of designer gowns, celebrity sightings, and curious glances when Preston introduced her as the incredible chef who's captured my attention. And maybe my heart. By the time photos of them hit the society pages the next morning, Evelyn's small deli was swarmed with curious customers and paparazzi hoping to catch a glimpse of the sandwich maker who snared a billionaire. The sudden attention was overwhelming. "I'm so sorry," Preston said when he called to check on her. "I should have warned you this might happen." "It's not your fault," Evelyn assured him, though she was shaken by the invasion of her previously quiet life. That afternoon, Preston arrived at the deli with a security team who efficiently cleared out the gawkers and established a perimeter that allowed legitimate customers to enter while keeping the paparazzi at bay. "You can't do this every day," Evelyn protested as they sat in her tiny office behind the kitchen. "No, but we can figure out a better solution," Preston replied, his expression determined. "This will die down eventually. The media always moves on to the next story." But the scrutiny didn't die down. Instead, it intensified as their relationship continued to blossom. Gossip columns speculated about Evelyn's ulterior motives, and business reporters questioned whether Preston was making sound judgments with a deli owner on his arm. The pressure came to a head when an unflattering article appeared, suggesting Evelyn was using Preston to fund her failing business. She read it during a rare quiet moment at the deli, tears streaming down her face. "Don't let them get to you," Marco advised, sliding a cup of tea across the counter to her. "Anyone who knows you knows that's not true," but the damage was done. When Preston called to invite her to dinner that evening, Evelyn declined. "I think we need to take a step back," she said, hating the words even as they left her mouth. "This is affecting your reputation and it's destroying my privacy." "Evelyn, please," Preston began, but she cut him off. "I need time to think, Preston. This isn't the life I signed up for." The silence that followed was painful. Finally, Preston spoke, his voice tight with emotion. "I understand, but please don't make any final decisions yet. I'll respect your need for space, but just know that what we have is worth fighting for, at least to me." The next week was the loneliest of Evelyn's life. The media circus around her deli gradually dispersed as she refused to give interviews or comments about Preston. Business remained unusually brisk, though she suspected many customers came hoping for gossip rather than sandwiches. Falcon Industries continued to order catering, but Preston himself was conspicuously absent. Vivian handled all the arrangements, and though she was unfailingly professional, Evelyn could sense her disappointment. 10 days into their separation, Evelyn was closing up the deli when a courier delivered an envelope. Inside was a first-class plane ticket to Italy and a handwritten note. "Some problems can't be solved by staying where you are. Meet me there if you still believe in us." Accompanying the ticket was an address one Evelyn recognized immediately from her old photographs. It was her grandmother's village. Against her better judgment, Evelyn found herself on that plane the next day, having left Marco in charge of the deli. The flight gave her plenty of time to question her decision, to wonder if she was making a tremendous mistake. But something deeper than logic was pulling her toward Preston, toward the possibility they represented together. When she arrived in the small Italian village, a driver was waiting to take her to the address Preston had provided. As they wound through narrow streets lined with ancient stone buildings, Evelyn's heart raced with anticipation and fear. The car stopped in front of her grandmother's old house, the one from the photographs. But it looked different now, restored and alive with warm light spilling from its windows. Preston was waiting in the doorway, his familiar figure silhouetted against the golden light behind him. As Evelyn approached, she could see the hope and uncertainty in his eyes. "You came," he said simply. "What is this, Preston?" Evelyn asked, gesturing to the house. He took a deep breath. "I bought it when I saw your photograph, not to pressure you, but because I saw how much it meant to you. I thought maybe it could be a place for us away from New York, away from the scrutiny." Evelyn was speechless, torn between being touched by the gesture and concerned about the grand scale of it. Reading her expression, Preston quickly added, "I'm not trying to buy your affection, Evelyn. I'm trying to show you that I understand what matters to you, that I want to be part of your story, not just drag you into mine." He led her inside, where the house had been lovingly restored with careful attention to its original character. The kitchen was modernized but maintained its rustic charm, with copper pots hanging from the ceiling and a large wood-fired oven in one corner. "The local craftsmen did most of the work," Preston explained. "They remembered your grandmother. They told me stories about her bread and how the whole village would come when she was baking." Evelyn ran her hand along a weathered wooden table, the same one from her childhood visits. "You kept it," she whispered. "Of course, this house has history, your history. I wouldn't change that." Preston hesitated before continuing. "I've been doing a lot of thinking while we've been apart, about what really matters to me, about the kind of life I want." He guided her to the back of the house, where a new addition had been built, a large, airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking terraced gardens. "I envisioned this as the community space you talked about, a place for cooking classes, community meals, preserving traditional recipes." Preston watched her face carefully. Too presumptuous, Evelyn felt tears welling in her eyes. "You remembered everything I said, every word." Preston took her hands in his. "Evelyn, I don't care what people in New York think. I don't care about society pages or gossip columns. I care about building a life with someone who reminds me what's real and true in this world, someone who creates with her hands and her heart." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "I'm not asking because of this house, or because I'm trying to solve our problems with a grand gesture. I'm asking because these past 10 days without you have been empty, and I never want to feel that emptiness again." Preston dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Evelyn Green, will you marry me?" Not the billionaire and the deli owner, just Preston and Evelyn, two people who found each other over a sandwich. Evelyn laughed through her tears at his charming simplification of their complicated journey. "You make it sound so ordinary. The circumstances might be extraordinary, but what we feel for each other is the most ordinary, universal thing in the world. Love doesn't care about bank accounts or business empires." Evelyn looked from the ring to Preston's hopeful face, and suddenly all her doubts seemed insignificant compared to the certainty she felt about him. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." As Preston slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, Evelyn felt as if they had finally found the perfect recipe, two very different ingredients coming together to create something neither could be alone. 1 year later, Evelyn and Preston stood in the garden behind the Italian house, surrounded by friends and family as they celebrated their wedding. The old stone building now housed not only their part-time residents, but also Nana's Kitchen, a thriving culinary center where Evelyn taught traditional cooking methods and hosted community dinners. Back in New York, the Daily Bread had expanded into a successful chain of artisanal delis across the city, managed by Marco, while Evelyn oversaw menu development and special events. Preston had restructured his work schedule to split time between Italy and New York, finding that distance from the daily operations of Falcon Industries actually improved his strategic decision-making. As they danced under strings of lights in the Italian twilight, Preston whispered in Evelyn's ear, "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't ordered those sandwiches that day?" Evelyn smiled up at her husband. "I think some meetings are inevitable. If not sandwiches, it would have been something else." Maybe, Preston agreed, but I'm glad it was your sandwiches. They gave me a taste of what life could be when filled with passion and authenticity. He twirled her gently. You were the ingredient my life was missing. And you, Evelyn replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him, were the opportunity I needed to rise. Around them, their worlds had merged seamlessly, shipping executives chatting with Brooklyn deli workers, Italian villagers sharing wine with New York socialites. What had once seemed an insurmountable gap between their lives had become a rich tapestry of complementary experiences. As the evening progressed, Preston clinked his glass for attention. When the crowd quieted, he took Evelyn's hand and addressed their guests. A year ago, many people questioned whether a relationship between a billionaire and a deli owner could possibly work, he began. They saw only the differences in our bank accounts, not the similarities in our values. They couldn't understand that true connection transcends social boundaries. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes filled with love. But I knew from the first bite of that rosemary focaccia sandwich that I had found someone extraordinary, someone who puts the same care and passion into her craft that I try to bring to mine. Someone whose strength and integrity would challenge me to be better. Evelyn squeezed his hand, remembering the uncertainty and fear that had nearly kept them apart. And I learned that behind the headlines and wealth was just a man who wanted what we all want to be seen for who he truly is, to connect, to build something meaningful. As their guests raised their glasses in a toast, Evelyn and Preston shared a private smile, secure in the knowledge that their unlikely love story, which began with a simple sandwich order, had proven the skeptics wrong and created a recipe for happiness neither could have imagined alone. In the years that followed, they would face challenges and celebrate triumphs, always returning to the foundation they had built together, a life that honored both their worlds while creating something entirely new. And occasionally, on lazy Sunday mornings in their Brooklyn apartment or their Italian retreat, Preston would still request Evelyn's famous sandwiches, saying with a wink that the deli owner herself would always be the daily special he craved most.